Hello, how's everyone doing today? Today's video is going to be talking more about goth music, but something I want to get into is talking about what is the difference between goth music and metal music. I did a video earlier on TikTok like about a year ago about the difference between goth and emo music, and I might do another one for YouTube eventually. Probably should, but right now we're gonna move it forward between what's the difference between goth music and metal music. So if that's something that you're interested in and want to watch me itch my nose even though it looks like I was faking it, keep on watching. So the first thing that we got to do when talking about differences, especially between different types of music, is understand the similarities. What is the similarities between goth music and metal music? For one, the biggest similarity is there's some bands which would be considered goth adjacent bands would be that is very much lined up in the middle between goth music and metal music. Not talking about gothic metal necessarily. Talking about, I mean, they're more in the gothic metal genre, but these are bands that have very much been helpful to the gothic community in the sense that, they have inspired so many goths like you and me to be in the subculture. They've been in non-stop festivals like Mariluna, Wave Gothic Treffen, and etc. These bands, you know, have gone on tour with some of these goth bands, right? And metal bands, right? And these bands have the consistency of Typo Negative, Him, Evanescence, Within Temptation, The Birthday Massacre, I think I already said Him, Lord of the Lost, and then there's a bunch others, but those are some of the biggest ones that I can name on top of the list. I mean, you can say Motionless in White for this generation, but they're more of an emo band than anything. But those bands, when it's like in the metal genre, but goth adjacent, Marilyn Manson, Rob Zombie, those types. Those guys really did help bring people into our subculture, get people thinking, wow, I like this look, but I keep hearing it's called gothic, but I keep hearing that's not what goth music is. Let's look into what goth music is, right? So they get into that and they're like, wow, this is a really nice type of music. I love this, So goth adjacent music does have a part to play in goth music. And while some bands have more of an impact in goth than others, they still have that impact. Like, for example, Him, with how big of a band they are, I know they've done shows with London After Midnight. I know they've done shows, Billy, the lead singer, he's done shows in Wave Gothic Treffen, Mariluna, etc. So that is a similarity that we need to understand is that. Another similarity is there's a lot of goths that are metalheads. There's a lot of metalheads that are also into goth music. It's a lot of us don't just listen to one type of music. We listen to a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it is very much a thing that a lot of us each have in common. You know, hence being a lot of goth adjacent bands. And finally, for similarities, a lot of lyrical stuff can be very similar in the sense, when, any music genre in general kind of talks about death, right? Loss of death, mourning, tragedies, the brutality of this world, right? A lot of music, almost every genre of music talks about that in some way, shape, or form. A lot of it does. So, now what are the differences between goth music and metal music? Well, The first difference is, let's talk about the heaviness, right? The heaviest goth music we'll get is death rock. Um, which, it's still very much punk rock, right? Or very much in the between of punk, right? So, like, with death rock, like the saying that goes, it's too goth for punk and too punk for goth, right? Is very much, it's heavy, but it's not heavy as in, like, heavy metal type of sense, right? Now, metal, I mean, there's so many different types of heavy metal. I mean, that's heavier. It goes way beyond heavier than goth music, right? I mean, there's some types of metal music that's like kind of a lot slower, repeated, and slower tempo, and more relaxed. Like you could say like Typo Negative, for example. Well, not early Typo Negative, like the Typo Negative that everybody loves and adores, right? Um, Music wise, but um, heaviness definitely goes to metal music, right? It's very heavy, very deep, and yeah. With lyrics in mind, metal typically also has multiple subjects, right? Like metal, there's some metal that talks about cars. There's the classic heavy metal or thrash metal that was from the 80s, where it would talk about fantasy, fighting off dragons and castles and all that stuff. And then you got new metal, which new metal was one of the first that started to talk about mental health and mental issues within the metal music, at least mainstream metal, right? Like uh you definitely didn't really hear like Iron Maiden or uh, Metallica talk about their inner struggles within their lyrics, right? Unless it's like very metaphorical, right? And that's what early metal. And then you got new metal, which kind of changed the face for metal in a lot of lyrical terms, right? Like when new metal became a thing, so many metal bands in general within the 2000s, kind of brought into that mental health, talking about suicide awareness and stuff like that, you know, which, mental health and suicide awareness and stuff like that, that has always been a part of goth music. There's so many goth bands where, the whole point of why we love The Cure so much is the nonstop talk that Robert has about his mental, or not his mental health per se, but mental health in general, right? Like the struggles of getting out of bed, Friday I'm in love, right? Like that is like a really big thing within goth music, right? You know, and the idea of like trying to get out of this depression state, or the idea of getting out of the world that terrible, the terrifying parts of the world, at least, right? Now, gothic metal, a lot of, there's bands, like I said, that within gothic metal that's very much goth adjacent, like Typo Negative, Him, Birthday Massacre, Evanescence, Within Temptation, those those type of bands, Lord of the Lost, right? Like those guys definitely have their impact within both both subcultures, right? Not so much Evanescence anymore, but like early Evanescence, right? But gothic metal typically, you know, definitely reached out to its own thing by now, at least, right? Like you can say there's so many bands that would be considered gothic metal that are more in the realms of symphonic metal or doom metal, or you know just alternative metal, and that's just kind of a common thing with gothic metal. It's more of like, it's more of an aesthetic at that point, rather than the type of music. The more it branches off, if that makes any sense, like for example, uh Epica, or this band called Red Queen, like they have this really heavy dark sound. It's beautiful, but it's not doesn't have that goth sound. But they're still very much described as gothic metal and very much symphonic metal with epica, at least, right? And a lot of new metal bands would be have that term considered gothic metal, right? And that's something to understand is gothic metal doesn't necessarily really have the same qualities as goth music. The tempos are different. The lyrical standpoints at some of them is very different at some points. There's that. Appearance wise, there's not really a difference there. That's another similarity, right? A lot of metalheads and goths wear the same things, right? A lot of times, although there's various different parts of each fashion subtext, within each musical um, subculture, right? Like you can definitely tell, if someone's a metalhead or a goth, but for the most part, we do kind of dress a lot alike with each other. So, you know, it's very interesting to see it's funny because whenever there's like a goth band that has more of a poppy side to it, you see a music video. I swear I was not picking my nose. That was a hair on my nose. I'm sorry. But anyways, what I'm saying is with, some of these poppier, goth bands that have that more of a pop sound, like The Cure, or, I'm talking about newer goth bands, of course, when they come up with a music video, there's so many people that are commenting, oh my gosh, why are they dressed like that? That's not metal. This is not goth. Oh my god, what is that? It's like, dude, shut up. Um, Goth music isn't heavy, nowhere near heavy as metal would be, right? You know, there is pop elements in goth music, There's I mean not like hip hop elements, but pop elements, So, that's something that I do find kind of interesting within the online community going at it with each other, or they'll be saying, "Oh, why is this band dressed like that? That's not heavy metal enough." It's like, come on. Nearly every subculture in music are people that mainly wear black, right? A lot of people wear black, So, yeah. Now, history wise, I mean, heavy metal started before goth, right? But I mean, they kind of also had their same, like, ah, sort of started together, but heavy metal was first, right? Um, you know, it was more of like, heavy metal was more of like, rock, hard rock, while goth music came from punk music. And while I'm not entirely 100% sure, I was reading an article a while ago, and it was basically talking about how the whole point of punk rock, aside from the political views being made, was because of how pissed off it was at regular rock music, right? Like, I think there's like some sort of anger that it had towards rock music, or like other types of rock music. So it like had that anger. So it kind of has its own thing with punk rock. It's really weird. I mean, I don't know how entirely true that is, but I mean, it's something I can see because whole point of punk is they're fucking pissed. They're pissed off people and they want to let people know. But I mean, pissed in not in like they're not you know not like a negative way, I guess you can say. It's like they're sick of stuff that's going on, like current states. But yeah. Now let's talk about the popularity within goth music and metal music, right? Like metal music is. I promise I was not picking my nose. I have cats and they get everywhere, especially around my nose when I have makeup on for some reason. But the popularity between goth music and metal music is like, just take, like, for example, popularity of goth music is like this, right? And then metal is like, it's like probably the most, maybe the second most popular type of music in the industry. There's award shows for metal music. There's, Golden Gods, the Alternative Press. There's metal bands and rock bands that's won Grammys. They've won, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. All that beautiful stuff, which the bands definitely deserve it. They definitely do. They put their worth out and stuff. But, it is very much a thing that is, you know, they get very much recognized for their work a lot more than so many other types of, music, including goth. With goth music, the most popular band that I've seen known to get goth music doesn't necessarily get the same amount of like known worth, as metal music does, and granted, there's so many other metal bands out there that deserve a lot of recognition, right? Compared to like pop music and country music, right? But by far, metal music gets so much more recognition than not only goth music, but a lot more recognition than industrial music, a lot more recognition than so many other types of music. It's crazy. I think the most popular band in goth music would be The Cure, which they've, were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame about a year or two ago. But aside from them, I don't think there's any other band that's goth, or at least was goth, because The Cure ain't goth anymore, right? But that's had that kind of fame. Like I said, the kind of popularity between goth music and has with each other is like there's bands that's more known than other bands, like staples. Like for example, everyone knows The Cure, right? In the goth world, everyone should know The Cure, And then there's bands that's the very well known, like Dead Can Dance. They are highly popular, like I've seen some of their shows can't sell out within like an hour, right? Um, got the Sisters of Mercy, you got, a few others that, kind of stand out. But that's just how it is. So, you don't really see them get much awards. You don't really see them get Grammys or anything like that. But metal definitely has the upper hand in that. But I think that's also part of the music industry is they don't want to explore what's different than what the popular stuff is. And I hate to say it, but metal music is pretty popular. Festivals. Festivals are another thing that's kind of a difference. Aside from the goth adjacent bands, right? Um, Goth festivals in general, they're different from Europe than they are from like the Americas, right? And I don't know how they are in Asia or Brazil, but at least from like what I've seen, is Europe definitely has the upper hand when it comes to goth festivals, right? While in the States, like the festivals here are more of like club nights and stuff like that, But the festivals for metal wise, oh my god, that is nonstop. That's like all over the world, right? Like you get nonstop at least like God, how many festivals are in America each year that are metal festivals? Like at least 70 plus, And that's just America. All over the world there's so many of them. And those things last days. And I think with Goth, biggest music festival for Goth would be Wave Gothic Tracking, right? And that's like I've heard it's like a between a 4 or 5 day thing of just nonstop partying and listening to music and stuff like that. So that's another difference. Like when you go to a metal festival versus a goth festival, it's like completely they're like different atmospheres. They're positive atmospheres for the most part, but from what I've seen is they're a lot different from each other. That is basically all I have. All I can think of at the moment, the differences between the two. There's loads of differences between goth music and metal music, right? But, there's also similarities and stuff like that. But this is something that, people don't quite understand. I see when people type, especially like a goth adjacent band, right? They'll put like motionless in white, be like goth, 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 goth. And anyone who dares tries to say something, oh, goth music and metal music is just the same, it's not, there's similarities, in it, in, we're in no way, shape, or form bashing the band, right? It's like, something I notice within like the metal community especially is people have subjects where they place the band, right? And they will place a band wherever they want to place them, right? And anyone who says, I hate to break it to you, but Green Day is not a death metal band. Those people, and I mean, this is just an example, but you definitely seen it on online before. But the people that would place, say, "Oh my God, Green Day is the best death metal band ever," and when somebody dares tries to say, that's not death metal. This is what death metal is. They get all defensive and being like, "Why are you trashing this band?" Blah blah blah, and it's like that's not what we're doing. We're trying to, help you figure out, what death metal is. Green Day is a perfect band. They're a good band. I don't really listen to them much, but they're not death metal, And it's something that is so contrived. I don't know if that's a word or not. In music these days, And also another thing that I've noticed is, at least with the metal world and the goth world, you know, um, but more with the metal world is people like, especially with new bands, they are too afraid to admit that their favorite band is rock music. Like, they have this offended look about them when they get told that their favorite band is not metal, it's rock. I mean, it's okay. Rock can be heavy. There's types of rock bands that can be heavier than regular heavy metal. Like, I think that is something that people, lately have been having a straw up their asses about, and it's crazy because it's music, rock music. If it wasn't for rock music, there wouldn't be metal. And that's the same. A lot of people have that thing about with goth music is they, especially when they don't really understand what goth music is, you know, they just find the aesthetic, and they've been told, they're like their favorite band is obviously a goth band when they say it's like, for example, they'll say Falling in Reverse. Fuck that band, but still, people, someone will say, "Oh my God, best goth band ever," and they will not accept anything else. And it's crazy because why are you so absurd and confident with sticking your favorite band in that one category? You know what I'm saying? Like, my all-time favorite band is Evanescence. They're not a goth band. I can definitely say that they're goth adjacent and they've helped many people in the goth subculture, but they're not goth, right? Like, there's a big fine line. I mean, even Amy Lee, commented, she thinks she's not a goth. She does like Depeche Mode and The Cure, but, I mean, again, Depeche Mode isn't really a goth band either, but, you know, um, it is, there's a fine line between, is it a goth band or is it not a goth band? And so many people are just like so content and obsessed with putting the bands that they like as goth because it's like, it's the aesthetic, right? And it's like, it's not an aesthetic, it's way more than that, And I can understand, being, wanting to be goth and, just finding out, oh, your favorite band isn't goth, I guess, it can be a bummer, I guess, but, so many goths that I know, their all-time favorite band in the world isn't a goth band, like, I've met people that their all-time favorite band in the world is the Smashing Pumpkins. I've met people where their all-time favorite band in the world would be Big Time Rush. You know, it's, you know, it's absurd that, people have to put, you know, their favorite bands in a specific place. So hope this rant gets some info. People get some. I did not mean to burp. I hope people get some good information about it. And that being said, another band that I was trying to think about, as goth adjacent and more on the gothic metal side, would be Cradle of Filth. That is a perfect example of a band that stepped more into the aesthetics rather than just, the type of music. Even though they've definitely helped people within the goth subculture. They definitely have. But, you know, that's another band that would be considered, goth adjacent, right? Metal wise, right? But, it is an interesting debate, especially with metal music, to debate the difference between goth music and metal music. And it's interesting that gothic metal even is like considered a subgenre, even though most of the bands that are considered in the genre are more of a different type of metal. You know, Again, it's crazy, but hopefully you guys like this video, and I kind of want to make this a series, because a lot of times people get goth bands confused with other types of music, and I feel like, more we know, the better. And I think the next video, I might do another proper YouTube video about the difference between goth music and emo music. But I also want to do one of the difference between goth music and industrial music. There's so many, and that is even a harder video to make, right? Because goth music and industrial music is like way, you know, they've got, right? Let's just say goth music, industrial music right here, right? And then there's types, and there's bands that's gone super close, blending in together like this, right? And then it's like there's bands that are like way completely different from each perspective of the thing. So it's very difficult to explain, but hopefully I'll be able to. And hopefully you guys like this video. And if you like my makeup and my terrible sign of the satanic cross, that was my first attempt in making. And I hope you enjoy it. And I do apologize for filming this in the bathroom, but it's the best place for lighting, especially with how the time of year is. So, goodbye.